Okay, so this webinar will cover setting up your assets in Maintenance Assistant, which is generally one of the first things you do when you're getting into your software. So there are three main asset categories: facilities, equipment, and tools. So facilities are things like your parent facility or warehouse. You can have things like departments or rooms, or just it's more of an asset to group the other assets together. So again, like a functional area or a department. Okay. Equipment and tools are fairly similar, and you'll notice that when you look at the two forms, they're almost the same thing. Equipment has a little more detail allowed in it, but they're fairly similar in terms of their use. Okay, so for asset categories, I'll also point out that there are three main ones, but you can define as many subcategories as you want. So for instance, under equipment, you can have several child categories. You can have an HVAC category, a scanning category. So user defined, so you can really have as many different custom categories as you like. Okay, and we'll get into that when we set it up. Now, as far as creating new assets in the software, there are essentially three ways of doing it. So the first way, which is the easiest, is adding the new assets manually. Okay, so one at a time, filling in the details by hand. It probably takes the longest, but it's also the easiest to do. Okay, so we'll go through an example of that now. Okay, so I have my demo database here. I've logged in, I'm looking at the dashboard. And to create an asset, what I'm going to do is go down on the left menu to the Assets tab. Okay, there's two views available for looking at the assets. View is flat list, which just shows all the assets in your system in a list. And then there's tree view, which kind of gives you a visual layout of how they're set up. So you can drill down, like Boston facility is a parent location. I can expand it and see the different locations or pieces of equipment inside. So I have West Wing. Inside West Wing, I have a few more assets. Okay, and so on. So again, I'm looking at this in tree view. And I've got four different levels here. So Boston is the main one, and then West Wing would be a child asset of Boston. The milling line is inside West Wing. And here I have a piece of equipment, the milling station, which is inside the milling line. Okay, so you can get as detailed as you want here. Like I have four different levels right now, but I can go 10 deep or 20 deep or however many you want, okay? So to create a new asset using the first method, I'm going to go to the asset list and just click New. Okay, so here it asks me which kind of asset do I want. Again, there are three main categories: locations, equipment, or tools. Okay, so we'll run through an example where I set up a new facility. So the first thing I'll do is create that facility, a new location. Okay, and this one we'll call it the New York headquarters. Okay, so the name goes here. I've got a box here for the description if I want. Description is optional, but you can provide a little more detail if you want. Okay, so the name is the most important part. After the name would probably be the location as the second most important field. So when you're placing assets in your hierarchy, you generally have two options. Okay, you can make it part of an existing facility, or the second option is to make it its own top-level facility. Okay, so because this is a parent asset, we're going to put it on the very top. And I don't actually know New York too well, so for the address, I'm just going to put it as in New York. Okay, it's a Google Maps plugin, so we didn't write this ourselves. We just kind of borrowed it from Google, and it figures out that I want New York in the United States. All right, and save. That's all the detail I need for now, just the name and where I want it located. Okay, now if I go back to my assets, I still have Boston and Parts Warehouse. These are the two top-level facilities, but I've added a third facility on the top level that's called New York headquarters. Okay, so now I'll manually create the second asset, which I'll put inside the New York headquarters. Okay, for this one, I'll just call it the machining department. Okay, the name, again, the description is optional, and I'm going to place it in my hierarchy. So I have two options. I can make it part of an existing facility, Or the second option, I can make it its own top-level facility. In this case, I'm going to put it inside the New York headquarters. So I click the first option, and then here I have a list of my assets, and I'll select New York as being the parent asset. Okay, and save. Okay, so you can see the map populates here. It inherits the address from the parent asset. If I go back to my list of assets, I still have New York headquarters on the top, but now I've got a little plus next to it where I can drill down and see the machining department underneath it. Okay, I'll do that one more time. This time, instead of a facility, I'm going to create a piece of equipment to go inside my machining department. Okay, so I'll select equipment as the asset type. You can see the form here is a bit bigger. I've got more tabs here to work with, a little more detail I can attach to a piece of equipment as opposed to a facility. Okay, so for the equipment, I'll call this my CNC machine. Okay, here in the description, I might want to include things like product specifications. I can have things like a criticality level. Really just any text you want that you feel is important for people to have access to, you can include in the description. It's very prominent. It's kind of the first thing they see or the second thing they see when they open the asset. So it's just a general text field you can use however you want. Okay. For locating the piece of equipment, I have a similar set of options. I can say this equipment is part of, and this option is used if I want to put it inside another piece of equipment. So let's say instead of a CNC machine, I was doing like the CNC motor. Okay, and I was putting the motor inside another piece of equipment. Okay, we'll do that example next. So for now, I'm just going to say the second option. This equipment is located at. Okay, and I'll put it inside, not inside my New York headquarters. I'm going to drill down and see, okay, I'm putting it inside the machining department. Okay, and I'll save. Okay, so as soon as I save, again, it inherits the location from Google Maps. Okay, I'll do one more example just to show you how to locate assets a bit more. Again, a piece of equipment. In this case, I'll create a child asset to that CNC machine. So I'll call this a CNC motor. Okay. Rather than placing it inside an existing location, I'm going to place this one inside an existing piece of equipment. Okay, so that's the first option. This equipment is part of, and with this option, I'm only able to select other pieces of equipment. Okay, so in this case, I'm going to go inside New York, inside the machining department, and select the CNC machine I just created. Okay, and click Save. Okay, so now when I go into New York assets, by the way, you'll notice when you hover over things, you get a little double plus as an option as well. This just lets you expand everything all at once. So rather than drilling down once, twice, three or four times, I can just hover over here and it expands them all at once. Okay, so it gives me all four. So here I have the CNC motor, and it's a subcomponent to the CNC machine. Okay, which is exactly what I wanted. Okay, I think I have a question here. Okay, Ricardo asks, if I have equipment at different facilities, do I need to input both? What should I do first? Generally, I would do facilities first if you're wondering about it. Facilities are just easier to set up, and you want to be, it gives you more familiarity with the software for when you go to set up equipment. Equipment is maybe a little bit more involved, or you need to know a bit more about the different fields there. So yeah, generally I would say set up your facilities first. They're easier, and then you can put your equipment in second. Okay, so I'll quickly go through the equipment form just to cover some of the fields that are available here. Okay, so I already talked about the name and description. You'll notice there's an asset code here, so a section for the code. And if you don't change this, the system will just automatically assign a code. So the first code it gives is A1, then A2, A3, etc. Right? So this is the 29th asset I've created, so it's assigned the code of A29. Really, the code is just meant to be a unique identifier for the asset. So for instance, I might have multiple CNC machines, and they all have the same name. So how do you distinguish one CNC machine from the other? Well, the easiest way to do that is to have a coding convention. So you can say, okay, like I need to do a work order on A28 today, or this work order is for A31, right? And that way it kind of distinguishes similar assets from each other. Okay, the code can also capture other information. So for instance, you can have something like NY-001 to reflect that it's in New York. You can have like a criticality indicator in the code. So you can have like MED as like medium, right? Really anything you want with it. There's a really good blog article we did on asset codes and why they're important. And I'll actually be sending that along to people after the presentation. Okay, so next to the code, you have the category. So we created this as a piece of equipment, but as I mentioned earlier, you can define as many subcategories as you want. So I already have a few set up here. Under equipment, I have 3 subcategories: HVAC, packaging, and scanner. Okay, I do have the ability to set up a 4th or however many I want, but for now, we'll just leave it with the categories I have, and we'll select this as the packaging. Okay. So I've located it in the machining department. If I scroll down, I've got a few more fields here that are worth mention. So the account in charge department, I'm actually going to ignore for now. If you want to learn more about these tie into our purchase order module. And there's a webinar this Friday that covers purchasing. So if you want to use purchasing, find out what it's about, just know that the account in charge department, these are fields that relate to purchasing, and you can learn about that on our Friday's webinar. Okay, so we have a few tabs here. Make, model, serial number, fairly self-explanatory. They're just text fields. You can input numbers, letters, whatever you want. And the notes tab, similar to description, it's just a general text field. It's a bit further down, but any information you want to capture that isn't in description, you can add it to the notes. Okay, parts/BOM. BOM, if you don't know, stands for Bill of Materials. So this is where you can build or where you can attach a reference to a part that's commonly used by the CNC machine. So for instance, if you're tracking your parts and supplies in Maintenance Assistant, and you say, okay, I have this one part on stock and it's commonly used to repair the CNC machine, or it's a part that's commonly swapped in, you can attach that part to the CNC machine and have that reference there. So in this instance, I only have 3 parts in the system, which is not too complicated to keep track of. But if you're running a bigger operation, you have thousands of parts and hundreds of pieces of equipment, it's useful to sometimes build a reference list. So have your CNC machine and a list of commonly used parts, so that when technicians are completing work orders on the CNC machine, it's an easy reference to see which parts they might need to access. Okay. Next, you have the metering/events tab. So meter readings are fairly often used in Maintenance Assistant. You can set up schedule maintenance or preventative maintenance that's meter reading based. And one of the places you can enter meter readings on the asset is, well, from the asset itself. So open up CNC machine, go to the 3rd tab, and you can enter meter readings on it. Okay, it's pretty straightforward. You add a new meter reading, let's say 150 hours. Okay, you have other options. You don't have to do hours. These are just the default units that ship with the software, but you can define whatever units you want. So it doesn't have to be the ones that are here. Okay, in this case, we'll keep it simple and we'll do 150 hours. Okay, and it shows up here. Okay, similar to meter readings, you have at the bottom here, you can set up different events in the system. So this might be something like a power outage or an earthquake, or really any event you want. Those are just the easiest examples to think of. So let's say, for example, every time there's a power outage in your facility, the example here is at a hospital, you have to run a certain set of procedures to make sure everything is still operating correctly. So you can track that at the equipment level and say, okay, there is an event on this facility or this machine, and have a reference to that here. Okay, and then this will be covered more in a webinar later this week, but you can have schedule maintenance that's triggered when certain events are entered. So you have a scheduled maintenance that's running, and every time you enter that there was a power outage, a work order gets triggered. Okay. Next, you have the Personnel tab. So this is where you assign quote-unquote equipment owners for the CNC machine. So for instance, these are people you want to get notified when there's a new work order on the CNC machine, or if the CNC machine is logged online or offline. Okay, so for instance, I can attach myself to the CNC machine. And this ensures that I get notified when A, someone creates a work order for the CNC machine, B, when it's logged online or offline. So this little check mark here indicates the state of the CNC machine. And there's really only two states, online and offline. So I can log it from online to offline. It's indicate that it's out of commission, it's down for repair. And an email gets fired off to whoever's assigned under the Personnel tab. Okay. Warranties is a field I don't imagine is used too often. If you like, you can upload just basic warranty details to the asset. So say when it expires, okay, a certificate number and description of the warranty. Okay, I think the one feature around this is I've got an expiry date here of January 22nd of next year. So I believe a month before the warranty expires, a notification gets sent to whoever's assigned here to let them know that, hey, by the way, the warranty on the CNC machine is going to be expiring in the next month. Okay, I believe that's the only functionality around it. Okay. Next to warranties, you have businesses, which is definitely a little more useful. So here I can attach, I'm not sure how many businesses I have in the system. Yeah, I have two suppliers here, Grainger and Sanyo. So this is used for tracking who the original manufacturer is, or who the service provider or supplier is. Okay, this comes a little more in handy for parts and supplies, but it also can be used for equipment, okay, or tools rather. So you can track that this is the service provider for my CNC machine, and maybe the part number if that's necessary. Okay. Purchasing, again, is something I don't imagine is used too often, similar to warranties. If you want to, you can just track basic purchasing details for the equipment. So who you bought it from, how much you paid for it, the date you ordered it, and the date you received it. Okay, the Files tab is actually pretty neat. You'll notice this tab on a lot of different elements in the system. So the Files tab, you'll see on work orders, you'll see it on scheduled maintenance, you'll see it on users even. And all it does is let you select files from your computer and upload them to the asset. So for instance, I can take a picture of, I don't think I have a CNC machine here, but okay, we just instituted drag and drop functionality, so you can grab a few at once if you want. Just drag them over. Okay, and for pictures, actually, you can select which one you want to be the default picture, and that's what it'll show here. So let's say I want this. Really, all I'm doing is opening up the file and selecting for the file type. Instead of image, I'm going to select default image. Okay, and because it's the default image, it shows up over here. So that's pretty handy. Here I uploaded pictures, but you can just easily upload Excel sheets, PDFs, Word documents, whatever you want. Okay, there's a size restriction, but it's about 10 or 12 megs, I think, per file, maybe more. Okay, next to the Files tab, we have the Custom tab. So this is used for custom fields. If there's something you want to track where there's no space for it here, like let's say, oh, I really want to add the RPMs for all my HVAC equipment or all my packaging equipment, but it's kind of awkward to put it in the description, or I don't want to bury it down there. So what you can do is create a custom field for the asset category, right? In this case, I'll use RPM. And for the type of field, I'm going to say, okay, it's just a number with no decimals. Okay, so that creates a new custom field for the CNC machine. Okay, I may not have access actually under this. I don't think I'm operating as administrator. But it gives you a new field where you can just enter the data and it's tracked there. Okay. The disadvantage to custom field is like unlike the description, which is very prominent and always available, the custom fields are buried on the second last tab. Okay, so the last tab, and this kind of wraps up the details of our assets, is the log. Okay, and the log is actually really useful when you're kind of investigating asset histories. So under the log, you'll see any current schedule maintenance. So if you have a schedule maintenance set up like every month or every year, it'll show up here. You can see any open work orders, any past work orders that are closed. You can see a full list of parts that have been consumed by the asset. So if you had to use a certain part to repair the CNC machine, you can track that here. It'll be shown like used this many widgets on this date, and here's how much it cost. Okay, Eddie asked, can I save equipment manuals in the files? Yes, absolutely. If you have PDFs or Word documents or something of that nature, you can upload them to files and they're there. They're easily accessible. Damien asked, will the log ever be collapsible? I'm presuming because it's taking up, or it's displayed too large and you have to scroll down to get to the last few tabs. Yeah, make it smaller. For the time being, no. We are constantly making improvements to the UI. So if there's something like that you want to see changed, feel free to submit a feature request to our team and it'll be considered and prioritized. Okay, so the short answer is for now, no, unfortunately, you just have to scroll down to find what you're looking for. Okay, so list of parts and supplies consumed. The cost tracking shows how much you've spent on labor on work orders for the CNC machine. So if you have a work order where Jim spent 5 hours on it and Jim makes $10 an hour, you can see here on this date, 5 hours at $10 an hour is equals $50 for that work order. Okay, and finally, you can see a full history of online and offline. So currently I logged it offline, right? So which is still the state that it's in. So offline from January 20th of this time. If I log it back online, okay, here you go. So you can see logged offline by Greg at this date, and then later logged back online also by Greg. Okay. So that's all the information that's available to enter on your assets. Okay, I think one thing I didn't mention was you notice the QR code here. So this is designed so that you can print out these QR codes and attach them to the assets in your facility. And then what you do is you get a QR code scanner on your phone. And as you walk past, you can just scan the little thing and it'll bring you directly to the asset. Okay, so it's really useful if you have a bunch of similar assets, like you have like 5 different CNC machines and you don't know which one is which. You can attach QR codes to each one, and that way you don't ever mix them up when you're trying to identify them. It's also just faster. So if you're using your mobile phone and you want to access the details of the CNC machine, instead of having to like open a browser, type in the address, log in, search for the asset, and then open it, instead you just scan the QR code and it brings you right there. Okay, Kristen is asking, how would you print that QR code? Okay, so I can show you right now, actually. It's an excellent question. Okay, so I'm looking at all my assets here. So on the very top here, you have a list of options of things to do with these assets. So I can import a list of assets, which is actually the next example we'll be doing. I can export the list. So I can just select, for instance, the entire list and click export, which will give me just an Excel sheet that lists all the assets here. I can print individual assets. So if I select the box wrapper, for instance, and print it, right, it gives me just a little PDF of all the details of the box wrapper. And to get to Kristen's point, I also have the option to print asset tags. Okay, so I can select the assets I want. Like, let's say I'm only going to do this for my equipment. I don't need to worry about the facilities. So I can select the equipment this way. A bit faster would be to filter by equipment first. All right, so I'm only going to show my equipment, select all, and then when I print asset tags, there's two different formats we use. I believe one is the American style printing, and the other one is for Europe and Australia. I'm not sure where else. So the address label 30 per sheet or 27 per sheet, which I believe is A4. Yeah. Okay, so I select the printing format I want and click print asset tags. Okay, which just gives me a PDF of all the asset tags here. Okay. Yeah, Kristen's saying that's awesome. I agree. So if you're printing the asset tags in the United States, we've vetted a few suppliers. So I mean, you can just print out the paper and attach it with tape, which is kind of flimsy. You can't really expect those to last too long. If you want to do it to have a little more longevity, we've vetted a few printers that can do like the hard metal ones that are weatherized and can handle, you know, heat and moisture and all that. Okay, so you can contact us later to find out who our approved suppliers of these are. Okay, so that's creating assets manually. The second method I mentioned is importing via CSV spreadsheet, okay, which is a CSV stands for comma separated variable. It's a file format that you can edit in Excel. Okay, so just like an Excel document, but has a different file extension. Okay, so I'll bring up my example here. Okay, so here I've got an Excel sheet with my .csv file opened in it. And I'm just going to run through a basic example. So before, what I did was if I wanted to create a new facility, like if I wanted to enter 4 assets, I have to go new, enter the details, save. Then go back, click new, enter the details, save. And it's a bit cumbersome. It takes a bit longer. So what I can do instead is populate my spreadsheet with all the assets I want and then import them all at the same time. Okay, so the most important columns, just like when we were creating new assets, are name and then where you want it located. Okay, so here I've got, I'm going to import a new facility as well as a few rooms and a few pieces of equipment to go inside it. Okay, so the first one is my New York facility. And for the category is like the asset type. So again, locations, equipment, or tools. Or you can pick the subcategories as well. So I don't have to pick equipment. I can pick a subcategory of equipment, say packaging. Okay. And don't worry about writing down the details of this. What I'll do after the presentation is send out a link to the asset import page where you can download templates and examples. Okay, so the location name is the name of where it's located. So for instance, the New York facility is going to be a top level facility. So I'm going to leave this blank. It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't go inside anything. Okay, whereas room 101, 102 in the basement, I'm going to place all of these inside the New York facility. So what I'll do is I'll copy this and say room 101 goes inside New York facility, so does room 102 and the basement. Okay, and as far as the category, these are all going to be locations of facilities as well. Okay, next I have my equipment. So I have HVAC 1 and 2, air condenser and heating unit. And just for simplicity, I'm going to put all of these inside the basement. So for the location name for these 4 items, I'm going to say it's the basement. Okay, and the category, I'll make these all just pieces of equipment. Okay, so these are really the only 2 mandatory fields. You can include the category as I have here, but if I had left these blank, I can select a default category like when I'm doing the import. Okay, if I want to import multiple kinds of equipment, so in this spreadsheet I have locations and equipment I'm importing. In this case, I need to specify the category. I need to say these ones are locations and these ones are equipment. Okay, I've got a few more fields here, so I can include a description of things. Okay, if I want, again, it's optional. For equipment, you might want to include the make, model, serial number. Okay, those are pretty handy. And there's still about 10 other columns I could populate if I wanted to, but for the sake of simplicity, we'll ignore those for now. Okay, so that's it. I'm going to save. When I'm doing this in Excel, I had initially to I had to select Save As and then select the file type as .csv. Okay, if you just save it as an Excel file type, I think it's like .xslx. If you try and import an Excel file, it's going to break. Okay, so I've got my CSV here, and now to import it, there's two ways I can do this. When I'm looking at my assets menu, I've got an option here called import. Or the other place, I can go down to settings and just do a generic import where I click import here. And then it asks me what kind of data do I want to import. Okay, so I can do assets, businesses, meter readings. Okay, I got a bunch of options. For now, we're just going to do assets. Okay, so it asks me to select my file. Okay, and I scroll down. It's the demo asset import. And this checkbox here, my data includes headers. So that's just asking, did you label your columns? So like, is this first line, is it data or is it the labels of your columns, right? And it's generally a good idea to label your columns just to keep things clear. So my data includes headers. Yes, it does. Okay, and I'll continue. Okay, so now what's asking me to do is match up the columns in my spreadsheet, which are on the left here, with the fields in the CMMS. Okay, so by name is what I called it in my spreadsheet, and the actual name for it is an asset name, okay, which it figured out. So location name maps over to location name, category, etc. Right? So this mapped over pretty easily because I knew exactly what to call these things. If I had made a mistake, like let's say for instance I called this type, I tried to import a column here that says type. It would get to this line and say, okay, type, I don't know what that is. Choose a field in the software that you want to import this type information to. And it would say, oh, the type, that's equipment and category, or that's equipment and facilities. I actually meant to put that as category. Okay, and it would ask me to map it over. Okay, I'll click continue. Just runs through the sheet. Everything looks good. There's no conflicts, and I can import it. Okay, and done. Okay, so now I'll go back to my assets. We'll view it as a tree. Okay, and I've got I created two New York headquarters by accident. So the spreadsheet items are under New York facility, I believe. So in here I've got the basement, room 101, 102, which are all inside the New York facility. Right? I had the location name for these things as New York facility. And then the assets, or the piece of equipment rather, for the location name, I put them all in the basement. Right? So I can expand this here and see these four items. Okay, so that's the second way of setting up your assets, and generally it's what we recommend. It might take 15 or 20 minutes or more possibly to learn the ins and outs of import. Like I did a very basic example, and I've been doing this for a couple of years. But when you're first learning import, like watching the videos, reading through the documentation we have on it, yeah, it might take you a little while to figure out and do some practice. But I think in the long run, it'll save you a lot of time. If you're setting up a large number of assets, like I'd say more than 50, you definitely want to use an import. Okay, setting that up one by one is going to take you forever. Okay, which brings me to, I guess, the last method for setting up assets, which is using the MA Source toolbar, which is another new innovation by us. So using this, I'm going to create a new asset, call it equipment. Okay, and I can use this toolbar, or I have a mini version of the toolbar right here. Let's say I want to include a heating unit. Okay, so I type it in here. The search, this crawls the Grainger MRO supplier website, and say, okay, I'll just pick one really quickly here. So the heating unit I'm actually trying to install is this oven. Okay, and from there I can select autocomplete the details, which literally just pulls the information off Grainger's website and stores it here. So it uploads a picture. It has like the make, model, UNSPC code, as well as some notes. Okay, and save. So just like that, all the information I wanted about this oven is populated from Grainger's catalog. Okay, that took a little bit longer than I wanted to, so we'll briefly go over parts and supplies. There's really only one point that I want to drill home. So parts and supplies can kind of be viewed as the fourth asset category. Okay, but they're different enough. It's kind of a special setup for parts and supplies, and they're different enough that we separated them from just the assets list and given their own menu and set of supporting features. Okay, so unlike equipment, where you have one piece of equipment that's in this location, I can set up a single part, but then have stock entries in multiple locations. So I can have some in stockroom A, some in stockroom B, some in the basement. I can spread them out wherever I want. So I'll show you what that looks like. Excuse me. I'll create a new part. Okay, just like with the other assets, I can either create these manually, or I can import them using CSV, or I can populate the parts data from MA source. Okay, so I'll create a new part. Okay, I'll call this a robot arm hose. Okay, a description if I want to. And then what I'll do is this kind of information can be viewed as like the definition of the part. So like a description of it, what serial number it has, the amount you paid for it. Okay, you can also attach things like warranties or who the supplier is. So for instance, in this case, I can say that my supplier is Grainger. Okay, I can also upload, just like with other assets, I can upload files for this. So let's say, I don't know if I have a picture of an arm hose here, but I have something pretty similar. Okay, you can upload a picture there. Okay, and all these details can be viewed as the quote-unquote definition of the part. And then individual stock entries will dictate how much I have of it and where the stock is located. So I'll add a new location here, a new stock location, and I'll say, okay, I have in the New York facility, in the basement, I've got 5 of these, right? You can specify aisle, bin, row as well, but it's optional. So I can say aisle 1, row 5, bin B2, right? This part is optional. You don't need this. Okay, and this gives me 5 robot arm hoses in the basement of New York. Okay, I believe I have a question here. Okay, Ricardo asks, you can upload a parts list? Yes. So in the same way that I uploaded my equipment and locations, I can also upload parts. And I can even do it in the same spreadsheet. So instead of creating that from new, I could have done just another line here in my spreadsheet. Okay. I also might want to include, there's a column here I have called quantity on hand. Okay, where I can track how many I have. Okay, again, don't worry about remembering this. This is all included in the link I'm going to send out. Okay, but yeah, the short answer is yes, you can upload a parts list. Okay, so here I've got 5 in the basement, but as I mentioned, I can have parts scattered all across my my system. So I can put in the parts warehouse, I have 2. I can even put some in part storage in Boston. Okay. There's one field here called minimum quantity. So this is like the minimum allowable quantity you have for this part. And there's a few things it does. Like if I go from 4, and let's say I consume 3 of these, so it goes below the minimum quantity. This does a few things. So one is it kind of flags this part as being understocked. Right. So if I go to the list of parts, it's populated to the top and kind of highlighted to see that I have one of these and I'm supposed to have at least 2 at all times. So it kind of flags that part. The second thing it does is it notifies whoever's assigned to parts that one is out of stock. And the third thing it does is if you're using the purchase orders module, right? So right now I don't have this enabled, but purchase ordering or purchase orders are a feature you can have included in your CMMS. If you're using purchase orders, then you can choose to have a purchase request created or even an RFQ, a request for quote. And these can be generated automatically by the system when your parts run low. Okay, so